5 roots grow across 6 continents. None are grain, none are wheat, and together they produce 10 to 30 times more flour per acre than any cereal crop. One of them is in your yard right now. The flour industry moves $260 billion a year. And by the end of this video, you will know how to harvest free flour from all 5 using nothing but a bucket and water. You probably thought flour comes from wheat, maybe rice, maybe corn. The grocery store aisle confirms this. Bag after bag of grain-based powder, white flour, whole wheat, all-purpose, bread flour, self-rising. Every one of those is grown from annual seed planted in spring and harvested in fall, and every one requires fertilizer, pesticide, irrigation, and machinery. Every one generates revenue at every link of the supply chain. That is not an accident. The system was designed this way, not by nature, but by economics. I am Harry, this is Garden Explained. What I am about to show you will change how you look at every ditch, every pond, every flower bed, and every roadside vine for the rest of your life. In 2010, a team of researchers published findings that rewrote human history. Anna Revedine and her colleagues examined ancient grinding stones from 3 archaeological sites, one in southern Italy, one in central Russia, and one in the Czech Republic. These stones dated back 30,000 years. Embedded in their surfaces were starch grains, thousands of them, preserved for 300 centuries in the microscopic crevices of the rock. The grains came from plant roots, not from any cereal, not from any grain, from roots. Our ancestors were making flour, they were making bread, and they were doing it 20,000 years before anyone planted the first wheat seed. Think about what that means. The standard story of civilization begins with agriculture, the Fertile Crescent, domesticated grains, settled villages around 10,000 years ago. But those grinding stones predate all of that by 20 millennia. Women in Ice Age Europe were processing plant roots into flour while mammoths still walked the tundra. They had food technology. They understood starch extraction. They passed this knowledge forward for 1,000 generations. And then the modern world forgot it completely. If root flour is 20,000 years older than grain flour, then why does every grocery store, every agricultural university, every cookbook on the shelf treat wheat as the only flour that matters? The answer is not nutritional. It is not practical. It is economic. Wheat must be planted every year. Wheat needs fertilizer, it needs pesticide, it needs irrigation systems, combines, grain elevators, and milling operations. Wheat generates revenue at every stage. The global seed industry alone moves $60 billion per year. That entire business model depends on farmers buying new seed every spring. Hybrid varieties, patented genetics, and technologies that prevent saving seed from one harvest to the next. The whole structure runs on repeat transactions, a root that grows itself, spreads itself, and makes flour for free does not create a single repeat transaction, not one. This is not conspiracy, this is arithmetic. The 5 roots you are about to see have been feeding humans for thousands of years. Some of them are growing in your yard right now. Every one outproduces wheat per acre, and every one was reclassified, stigmatized, buried, or forgotten by the same systems that decide what ends up on your plate. The first root healed wounds before it ever made bread. Thousands of years ago, in the lowland forests of South America, indigenous peoples discovered a plant with an unusual property. The fresh root drew poison from arrow wounds when pressed against the skin. It was medicine first, food second. The name may come from the Arawak word aru, meal of meals. At the San Isidro archaeological site in Colombia, researchers found starch grains from this plant on grinding tools dating back to 8,200 years before the Common Era. That makes it one of the first plants ever domesticated in the Americas. The plant is arrowroot, Maranta arundinacea, a quiet, knee-high perennial that grows in shaded, moist ground. You would walk past it without a second look. No towering stalk, no dramatic root ball, just a modest plant with a modest rhizome hiding one of the finest starches in the world. The tuber contains roughly 23% starch by weight. That number sounds modest until you process it. The starch emerges pure white, odorless, almost tasteless, and it is one of the easiest starches for the human body to digest. It has a low glycemic index. It supports gut health by feeding beneficial bacteria. It works for people with sensitive stomachs who cannot tolerate wheat or corn. Mothers in the Caribbean have been giving arrowroot water to sick children for centuries. It soothes inflammation. It settles nausea. It is gentle enough for infants and the elderly alike. And here is what the food industry never talks about. When researchers tested arrowroot starch side by side with wheat flour, the color was virtually identical. It thickens liquids at lower temperatures than cornstarch. It holds up in acidic recipes where cornstarch falls apart completely. 1 tablespoon sets 1 cup of liquid into a smooth, glossy finish. There was a time when the world knew this. On the island of St. Vincent in the Caribbean, arrowroot once ran the entire economy. From the 1930s through the 1960s, arrowroot starch generated close to 50% of the island's foreign export revenue. It was the primary source of employment. Families harvested the roots. Factories processed the starch into pristine white powder. Ships carried barrels of it across the Atlantic to buyers in London and New York and Paris. Then 2 things happened at once. The banana industry arrived in the Caribbean, and cornstarch, manufactured cheaply from heavily subsidized industrial corn in the American Midwest, flooded the global market. St. Vincent's arrowroot industry collapsed within a decade. The factories shut down, the export ships stopped coming, the knowledge nearly disappeared with them. Today, there is almost no commercial data on arrowroot production. Cultivation happens informally on small farms and in backyard gardens. No major corporation invested in it. And why would they? Arrowroot propagates by rhizome division. You take a piece of root, you push it into soil. It grows more root. It rarely makes seeds. There is nothing to sell the grower next spring. No intellectual property, no patent, no recurring revenue, just a root that makes more root forever. Growing it takes almost nothing. The plant reaches 1 to 5 feet tall. It prefers moist soil and partial shade. Plant a rhizome section in a 10-gallon container with drainage holes. Keep it watered. A shaded corner of your patio works fine. The rhizomes mature in 10 to 12 months. You know they are ready when the leaves yellow and die back. Processing requires a bowl, a grater, and water. Peel the roots, grate them into cold water. The starch separates from the fiber and drops to the bottom. Pour off the fiber. Let the white sediment settle. Drain, dry. You have flour. Use it anywhere you would use wheat flour. It makes light biscuits. It makes smooth pancakes. It thickens gravies and soups to a silky consistency without the chalky aftertaste that cornstarch leaves behind. It sets puddings and custards beautifully. Mix it into sauces at low heat and watch it transform. 1 root, 1 bucket, free flour that your ancestors would recognize instantly. But the next root is the one that will hit you personally, because you might have this plant in your garden right now. You might have bought it at a nursery last spring. You might have spent real money on it. You water it, you fertilize it, you admire the blooms every summer, and you had absolutely no idea it was food. It sits in flower beds across the country. Big tropical leaves, bright red and orange and yellow flowers on tall stalks. Garden centers sell it as an ornamental. Landscapers install it along walkways, pool decks, and commercial planting strips. Millions of people grow it for beauty and never once suspect what is hiding beneath the soil. The plant is the canna lily, except it is not a lily at all. It belongs to the same botanical order as ginger, banana, and arrowroot. Its closest relatives are food crops, and canna itself has been a food crop for at least 4,500 years. The Inca cultivated it along irrigation channels in Peru and Ecuador. It was one of the earliest domesticated plants in the Western Hemisphere. Now here is where the numbers get hard to accept. Canna contains the highest percentage of starch of any tuber ever measured. Laboratory analysis puts the total starch content at 77% by dry weight. That ties with cassava for the highest concentration ever recorded in a root crop. The starch granules inside the root are the largest ever found in any vegetable, so large you can see them with the naked eye, and because they are so large, the starch separates from the fiber with almost no effort. You can extract it on a kitchen counter with a bowl and a grater. The yields are staggering. In nitrogen-rich soil, Canna produces up to 80 tons of root mass per hectare. In poor soil, 40 tons. Those numbers rival sugarcane for raw biomass. But unlike sugarcane, Canna is a true perennial. It returns every year without replanting. The rhizome network expands each season. The yield increases with age. It is a calorie savings account that compounds year after year. In Vietnam right now, 30,000 hectares of Canna are under cultivation for the production of cellophane noodles called Mien Dong. It is a major food crop there. In Java, it goes by the name Ganyong. In India, the roots are fermented into alcohol. In Australia, it was once a commercial crop sold as Queensland Arrowroot. 5 countries, 5 names, 5 food traditions, all built around the same plant that your local nursery sells as decoration with no mention of flour anywhere on the tag. The seeds of the Canna plant remain viable for 600 years, a plant designed by nature to persist across centuries, reduced by the modern garden industry to something you admire until frost kills the leaves. Then you throw it in the compost. Growing Canna for flour works in most of the United States. Plant rhizome sections 4 to 6 inches deep after the last frost. Full sun, regular water. It thrives in large fabric grow bags, raised beds, and 5-gallon buckets. In cold climates, mulch the bed heavily in November or dig the rhizomes and store them in peat moss through winter. Processing follows the same ancient pattern. Slice the harvested roots into thin discs, dry them for a day or two, crumble the dried pieces into a large bowl of cold water. The starch drops to the bottom. The fiber floats to the surface. Skim the fiber, pour off the water slowly, let the white sediment dry completely. Grind it, you have flour, the highest starch flour of any root on the planet. From the flower bed you planted for decoration, the roots can also be baked whole at 300 degrees for several hours. They come out sweet and dense like a starchy sweet potato. The flour makes flat breads and noodles. It thickens sauces. The young shoots can be eaten like asparagus. The broad leaves work as wraps for steaming fish or vegetables. One plant, multiple food products, growing in your yard right now while you buy flour at the store. 2 roots, both ancient, both erased, both sitting in American gardens while their owners pay for wheat flour wrapped in plastic. But the 3rd root breaks every comparison. It grows in standing water, in mud, in the margins of every pond and every roadside ditch on the continent, and it produces 16 times more flour per acre than any wheat field in America. You know this plant? You have seen it 1,000 times and never thought about it. The brown cylinder on a tall green stalk, standing in marshes, lining drainage canals, clustered around farm ponds and neglected waterways from Maine to California and across most of the world. The plant is Cattail, Typha, acre for acre. It may be the most productive flour source on the surface of the earth. Those 30,000-year-old grinding stones from Italy and Russia and the Czech Republic. The starch embedded in their surfaces came from this plant, cattail rhizomes, ground into flour by human hands while glaciers still covered northern Europe 20,000 years before the first field of wheat was planted. This was the original flour, the first flour, the flour before agriculture existed. It was not limited to one culture. Indigenous peoples across North America depended on cattail as a staple crop. The Apache, the Pomo, the Navajo, the Cahuilla, the Lumbee. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, tribes processed cattail rhizomes into flour for millennia. Around Lake Titicaca in South America, the same traditions developed independently. In Australia, the Noongar people harvested the roots as a primary carbohydrate. Different continents, different languages, different millennia. Same plant, same flower, same technique, universal human knowledge, gone in 3 generations. A study conducted near Wolcott, New York measured cattail productivity under optimal conditions. The researchers pulled 140 tons of rhizomes from a single acre. 140 tons. The average potato yield in the United States sits around 20 tons per acre. Cattail produced 7 times more root mass than America's most productive tuber crop. Process those rhizomes into flour, and the math does not get less extreme. 1 acre of healthy cattail yields approximately 6,475 pounds of flour per year. 1 acre of wheat yields between 200 and 400 pounds. That is 16 to 32 times more flour from the same piece of ground. The rhizomes contain up to 70% starch by dry weight. Caloric density matches wheat flour at 266 calories per 100 grams. Protein content compares to rice and maize, plus meaningful amounts of manganese, magnesium, and dietary fiber. A wartime survey by the United States government mapped cattail distribution across the country. They found 140,000 square miles of cattail wetlands, an area larger than Germany, growing wild, producing nothing of economic value, and classified by state agencies as nuisance vegetation. The global flour market generates $260 billion every year. Wheat alone accounts for 44% of that number. Farmers buy seed each spring. They buy fertilizer, they buy herbicide, they buy irrigation rigs. They harvest once in autumn and then start the whole cycle over again. Cattail refuses to participate. Plant it once and it spreads on its own through underground rhizomes. It requires no fertilizer because it thrives on the nutrient-rich runoff that kills other crops. It needs no irrigation because it grows in standing water. It needs no pesticide because almost nothing attacks it. It cannot be patented because it is a wild species in the public domain. Search any database for wheat flour research. Tens of thousands of papers, billions in funding, corporate sponsorship from every major food company on earth. Now search for cattail flour, a few hundred studies, most of them from Poland, Brazil, and Malaysia. Western agricultural science produced almost nothing. The plant that feeds itself was declared economically worthless because it could not generate shareholder value. Look at what happened to American wetlands. European settlers drained 90% of them. They converted cattail habitat into wheat fields, cornfields, and soybean fields, crops that need annual inputs, crops that generate annual sales. The cattails that survived were reclassified as invasive weeds. Government agencies now publish guides on how to kill them with herbicide applications, mechanical removal, and controlled burns. They are spending money to destroy a plant that produces 30 times more flour than what replaced it. Growing cattail is the simplest entry on this list. It lives in standing water from a few inches to 4 feet deep. Take a wide bucket or a plastic storage tub with no drainage holes. Fill it with pond mud or heavy garden soil. Push a rhizome section into the mud. Add water until it sits 2 to 4 inches above the soil line. Place it in full sun. By midsummer, the container will be full of cattail shoots. By the following year, it will be a permanent flour source. Harvest the rhizomes in late fall through early spring. The plant stores maximum starch in its roots through winter. Pull the rhizomes from the mud, rinse them, peel away the tough outer layer. The white core is pure starch. Grate it into a bucket of cold water. The starch sinks, the fiber floats. Pour off the fiber. Let the white sediment settle overnight. Drain the water. Spread the starch on a baking sheet. Dry it in the sun or in a low oven. Grind it. You have flour. Use it straight or blend it 50-50 with any conventional flour. It makes flatbreads, it makes pancakes, it thickens soups and sauces. The flavor is mild and slightly sweet, no bitterness, no grassy taste. Your grandmother's grandmother knew this flavor. Her grandmother knew it too. It is the oldest taste in the human pantry, and it is waiting in the nearest wet ditch. And the pollen works too. In early summer, each cattail spike produces clouds of bright yellow pollen. Hold a bag under the spike and shake. You collect a protein-rich powder that works as a flower supplement or a nutritional booster. One plant, multiple harvests, 0 inputs, 0 cost. A pond, a bucket of mud, free flower forever. 3 roots, 3 forgotten flower sources. 3 plants producing more per acre than any cereal field on the continent. But the 4th root will make you angry, because the United States government once spent millions of dollars convincing farmers to plant it, then spent millions more trying to wipe it off the map. In Japan, they call the starch it produces white gold. In America, they call the plant a federal menace. It arrived in Philadelphia in 1876. The Japanese pavilion at the Centennial Exposition displayed it as a lush, ornamental vine. Garden enthusiasts took cuttings home. For 50 years, it remained a porch decoration in the South. A curiosity, a conversation piece. Then, the Dust Bowl destroyed everything. In the 1930s, topsoil blew off millions of acres across Oklahoma, Kansas, and the Texas Panhandle. The Soil Conservation Service needed ground cover, and they needed it fast. This Japanese vine grew faster than anything on record, up to a foot per day in warm weather. Its roots gripped eroding hillsides. The government grew 70 million seedlings in federal nurseries. Civilian Conservation Corps crews planted it along highways and embankments from East Texas to the coast of Virginia. The government paid farmers $8 per acre to sow it. By 1945, more than 1 million acres of the American South were covered. The plant is Kudzu, Pueraria, Montana. And what the government did next defies logic. Within a decade, the vine had escaped every boundary. It climbed telephone poles and pulled down the wires. It swallowed abandoned barns until they disappeared. It grew over idle tractors and empty houses. The same agency that planted it began funding its eradication. Herbicide spraying programs, mechanical cutting, controlled burns. It is now listed as one of the 100 most destructive invasive species on the planet. In several states, it is illegal to plant. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Pacific, Japanese artisans in the mountains of Nara and Kagoshima still practice a centuries-old technique called Yoshinozarashi. They dig kudzu roots in winter and crush them. They wash the starch in cold mountain stream water over weeks, sometimes months. The result is a pure white powder of extraordinary quality. The starch is considered the finest in the world, and it is central to Japanese cuisine. From wagashi sweets to sesame tofu, from kuzu mochi desserts to kuzu kiri crystal noodles. In Korea, kudzu starch goes into naengmyeon cold noodles. In China, it has been one of the 50 fundamental herbs in traditional medicine for over 2,000 years. Kudzu fiber was one of 3 primary textile materials in ancient China alongside silk and ramie. The plant has served as food, medicine, and fabric for 6,000 years. The root itself contains 20 to 40% starch by dry weight. Mature plants develop underground tubers weighing several pounds each. Researchers estimate that wild kudzu stands in Alabama and Georgia could produce 5 to 10 tons of carbohydrate per hectare. That rivals the output of corn and sugarcane fields. In the United States today, there is virtually no commercial kudzu starch production. Nearly all kudzu powder sold in American health food stores is imported from Japan, shipped across the Pacific Ocean from the same species growing unchecked in every ditch and tree line from Atlanta to Richmond. Americans pay to poison it in their backyards and then pay premium prices to buy products made from it in a different country. The vine cannot be patented. It spreads by runner and rhizome without any human help. There is nothing to sell the farmer. Nothing to monetize in the supply chain. Because eradication programs have sprayed herbicide across millions of acres of kudzu habitat, The wild stands that could feed people are now potentially contaminated. The system that tried to destroy the plant also made it risky to eat. If you can locate unsprayed kudzu, harvesting is straightforward. Dig roots in late fall or winter when starch content peaks. The older and thicker the root, the more starch it holds. Wash the roots, chop or crush them, and submerge the pulp in a large bucket of cold water. Knead and squeeze the pulp to release the starch. Strain out the fiber and let the cloudy water sit overnight. The starch sinks in a dense white layer. Pour off the liquid, refill with clean water, stir, and let it settle again. Repeat this process 3 or 4 times until the sediment is pure white. Dry it on a sheet in the sun, then grind it. You have flour. It thickens sauces and gravies with a clean finish. It sets puddings and custards. It makes noodles with a translucent, silky texture. In Japanese kitchens, it is preferred over cornstarch for everything from soups to sweets. It is the finest thickening starch in one of the world's greatest culinary traditions, growing free and unwanted along every road in the American South. 4 roots, 4 plants producing flour with no grain involved, each one abandoned by the institutions that control what you grow and what you eat. But the 5th root stands apart from all the others. It already feeds 800 million people on this planet. It generates more calories per acre per day than rice, corn, or wheat. It is the 3rd most important source of calories in the entire tropical world. It has built nations and sustained civilizations across 3 continents, and it will kill you if you process it wrong. In sub-Saharan Africa, this root provides between 30 and 50% of all calories consumed. Global production in 2020 reached roughly 271 million tons. Entire economies depend on it. Entire populations are built on its harvest. 800 million people eat it as their primary staple food. That is more people than live in all of Europe. The plant is Cassava, Manihot esculenta, a tough, woody, perennial shrub with fat, starchy roots that thrives in conditions no other crop can tolerate. Poor soil, drought, heat, neglect. Where everything else fails, cassava still produces. The calorie math has no equal. Cassava generates more than 250,000 calories per hectare per day. Rice makes 176,000. Wheat makes 110,000. Corn makes 200,000. No major food crop on the planet matches cassava for raw caloric output. Under good conditions, yields reach 80 tons per hectare. Raw cassava root is about 60% water, 38% carbohydrate. Once dried and ground, that carbohydrate concentrates into a dense white flour that forms the foundation of dozens of traditional foods across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. But cassava carries a warning that none of the other roots on this list require. The roots, peels, and leaves contain compounds called cyanogenic glycosides. When plant tissue is damaged, these compounds release hydrogen cyanide. Bitter varieties of cassava contain up to 50 times more cyanide than sweet varieties. Eat it raw and unprocessed, and the results can be devastating. This is the reason cassava never became a Western commodity crop. A plant that demands knowledge before consumption does not scale into a fast food supply chain. It cannot be dumped raw into a processing facility and turned into product. It requires understanding. It requires patience. It requires steps that cannot be skipped. And indigenous societies figured those steps out thousands of years ago. The answer is water and time. Peel the root completely. Grate it into a clean container. Submerge the grated pulp in water. Let it soak for a minimum of 24 hours. 72 hours is safer. During soaking, natural enzymes inside the root break down the toxic compounds. The hydrogen cyanide dissolves into the water and evaporates into the air. This single process reduces cyanide content by 85 to 99%. Traditional fermentation, the method used to make fufu across West Africa, cuts cyanide by 91%. The Gari technique used in Nigeria brings it down by 80%. These are not laboratory protocols. These are kitchen traditions handed across generations. A bucket, clean water, a few days of patience, sunlight, that is all. But the label sticks. Cassava is still called an inferior crop by Western institutions, a poor people's crop, a dangerous crop. Those words did not come from nutritional science. They came from colonial economics. The root that feeds 800 million human beings is called inferior by the nations that grow wheat, the grain that produces a fraction of the calories on twice the inputs. Growing cassava in warm climates requires almost no effort. It does not grow from seed. You take an 8-inch section of stem from a mature plant, push it into loose soil at an angle. In USDA zones 8 through 11, the plant grows vigorously through the warm months. It handles drought once established. It produces in marginal, depleted soil where nothing else survives. Roots mature in 9 to 12 months. In cooler regions, cassava grows well in large pots inside a greenhouse or a south-facing sunroom. It needs consistent warmth. Above 77 degrees Fahrenheit is ideal. Even a few large containers can produce a surprising amount of root. Processing requires care, but not complexity. Peel each root thoroughly, grate it, submerge in clean water and let it soak for 3 days. Change the water daily. After soaking, press out the excess liquid. Spread the pressed pulp in a thin layer on a clean surface. Dry it in direct sunlight or a low oven. Once completely dry, grind it into fine flour. In West Africa, this flour becomes fufu. In Nigeria, it becomes gari, a toasted granular flour that stores for months without refrigeration. In Brazil, it becomes farofa, toasted and sprinkled over rice and black beans. In the Caribbean, it becomes cassava flatbread, a tradition reaching back to the Taino civilization. Cassava flour works as a 1-to-1 substitute for wheat flour in most baking. It produces gluten-free bread and pastry with excellent texture. The fresh root fries like a potato but with a crispier finish. It boils into a tender neutral starch that absorbs any flavor you give it. 5 roots, 5 flour sources older than civilization itself. 5 plants that outproduce every grain field on the planet while demanding almost nothing in return, and every single one was buried by the same system. The seed industry moves $60 billion per year. The agrochemical industry moves another $60 billion. Grain milling, transportation, storage, packaging, retail, each step adds cost. Each step adds profit. Each step adds a business that needs the farmer to buy seed again next spring. Now look at what these 5 roots have in common. Arrowroot spreads by rhizome. Canna lily spreads by rhizome. Cattail spreads by underground runners and wind-carried seeds. Kudzu spreads by runners, roots, and fragments. Cassava grows from stem cuttings. Not one of them requires seed purchase. Not one requires annual replanting. Not one participates in the $60 billion seed economy. They are all perennials or self-spreading. They all get more productive with time. Plant once, harvest for years, never buy flour again. The plants that cannot generate recurring revenue do not generate research funding. The plants without research do not enter university textbooks. The plants outside the textbooks do not reach the public mind. The plants outside the public mind do not reach the grocery store shelf. And in 3 generations, 30,000 years of human knowledge disappears. That is not a failure of memory. That is a failure of incentive. The knowledge did not vanish because people stopped caring. It vanished because no corporation could profit from keeping it alive. Every dollar spent teaching you about cattail flour is a dollar that does not sell wheat seed. Every garden bed planted with canna is a garden bed that does not buy fertilizer next April. The economics are simple. The silence is intentional. But you are here now. You heard this, and you cannot unhear it. Somewhere right now, a farmer is buying seed, buying fertilizer, buying pesticide, spraying fields, irrigating from a depleting aquifer, harvesting once, sending grain to a mill. The mill grinds it to flour. The flour goes in a bag. The bag goes on a truck. The truck rolls down a highway lined with kudzu vine, past a marsh thick with cattail, past a garden bed blooming with canna lily, past a wet ditch where arrowroot has been spreading untouched for decades. The truck delivers the bag to a store. You drive to the store, you pay for the flower, you drive home, past the same ditch, past the same marsh, past the same garden, past the same vine. The flower was under your feet the entire time. Oh, and if longevity fascinates you, my friend runs a channel called The Centenarian's Garden, all about blue zone secrets and what actually helps people live past 100. Go check them out, you won't regret it.